we were in deep, like, we're good conversation, like, totally in it and all this stuff, and then my son, he just, like, bursts into the room and says, "Can you open my goldfish?" Like, "Yep, sure." And it
Yeah.
was one of the more, like, businessy kinda ones, so it wasn't as casual, but it was pretty funny.
It's the way of the world. If you see like a little person throwing like Pokemon stuff right here, or a Katos, or making Power Ranger noises, those are my gremlins in the back.
I love it. Yeah, my gremlins did some, writing on my whiteboard back here and
I love
just
that. I
random
love
stuff.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've got all kinds of stuff. I'll properly introduce this thing now. So this is, I think, episode 8 of the Achieve and Enjoy podcast, and with me today, I've got Liz Davila-Sleigh. Thank you, Liz, for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks that for having me. Usually I'm sitting on your side
Yeah.
and interviewing people. And so this is kind of a novelty, me being interviewed.
Okay, well, you can judge me for how poorly I do at it. So this
No
is
judgment. A judgment free zone. Judgment free zone here.
well, this is attempt number 8 for me, but I have spoken to more than 8 humans, so hopefully I'm not too terrible. So, I'd like to start with just kinda your story, because you and I met through Leslie, who is an amazing person. She told me that I would like you, and she's not wrong about that kind of thing, because she's you know her well also, like, she's just an amazing human being. So I don't know that much about you. We talked for, 30, 45 minutes maybe, but I'd love to hear kind of some of the stuff that you'd mentioned before, but really like where'd you come from? Like how did you get to where you're at? What makes you you? And yeah, we'll just dive in and flow from there.
Yeah, love Leslie. She is an incredible person, and so I really appreciate her connecting me with you because in our kind of call that we had earlier, I first started off with, "I'm so glad I get to meet you, Matt, because I've been like hustling, I hustling all your LinkedIn posts, and I was like, let me see what this guy's about." 'Cause Leslie's my friend, and I am very protective of my friends, and so when she told me that she was taking the leap I don't want to tell her story, obviously. She can share that with people. But when she told me she was doing what she was doing and she was going to go work for you, I said, let me go see who this Matt guy is. And I'm like, oh, actually, I think he's really cool. Like, I like him. So when I first met you, I think I was like fangirling. I was like, oh, no.
I got the auntie approval then. Hey.
Yes, the auntie approval. That's right. So, just a little bit about me. I identify as a Latina woman. I am a first generation American now living in the UK. I am a mom of two gremlin boys that I'm trying to raise as being like kind and the best humans that they can be. Yeah, university is optional, but being kind and reading books is not. So that's kind of our mission in our home.
How old are your boys?
I my boys are, oh, this is gonna be heartbreaking because then I start thinking about how many summers are left over. My oldest one is 8 and my
Mm,
youngest one is 5. So I
okay.
always think about like how many summers we have left. And I know all the parents out there are probably like, why are you saying this?
Yep.
But essentially, like, how many summers do I have left with my kids to enjoy? And we're getting into the next summer. He's gonna be 9, and I'm not comfortable with that at all. I want them to be like little babies and stay like that forever, even though the baby phase was really hard, and you all know.
Yeah, the baby phase was I'm okay with that one being over for us. Now that ours are little kids, it's fun.
Yeah, they're super cool people. And then just being able to have these kind of deep conversations with them. So I'm a coach and a facilitator and speaker. So I help workplaces develop inclusive workplace communities. I intentionally use the word community because as we see in a community, there's so many differences. And in our communities, we want to honor all those differences, right? Connect through similarities, but honor differences. And so everything that I learn in this space, I try to teach my children as well too. So we learn about pretty heavy topics in our house, but obviously, more geared to children. But I'm like, you know what? If people can grow up to hate, they can also grow up to love
Mm.
and to show and spread kindness. And I think that's a lot. Like, that's why I really wanted to meet you because you definitely advocate for, you can be in an organization and you can hit your target and you can hit all your deliverables and you can be also kind and not suck at work. Right?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you pick up on that kind of part of the message because I know, like, I like the whole tagline of making work suck less and stuff like that. It's pretty light, it's kinda airy. Yeah, we think about, like, bad software and bad process and stuff, but the things that make it the worst are discrimination, fear, intimidation, like, all of those things that really do damage to people, and we'll get into that some more, but one thing I wanna note that you said is you called your kids cool people, and
Yeah.
and that's something that has fascinated me is how different they are. Like, I have 3 kids, and they're all different. They're totally different human beings, and I'm realizing how little control I have over how they're gonna turn out, what their personalities are. Like, we can influence them and help instill good values and some of those things, but the clay is there.
They're going to make up their own minds and make their own paths. And I'm here to just similarly, I use a lot of my coaching technique to my husband's not as excited about that part of it because I tend to coach him a lot.
Yep.
And then when he get me, he's like, the coachee got the coach. So now I'm the coach. And I'm like, okay, all right. But, I just try to use this approach of curiosity
Yeah.
and non-judgment in my line of work. I don't really bring myself into spaces. So I have my own podcast that we do talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason why we set that podcast up was because we wanted to be able to have a space where other equity and inclusion professionals could have a space and other coaches could have a space because we tend to not bring ourselves within the workplace. We are very much a neutral party and we like to call ourselves the guide on the side. It's super cheesy, but we like it's like the guide on the side. And so I'm just here with my kids to kind of be part of their journey
Yeah.
and witness the things that they do and be their champions. So we have family meetings every week. We don't have family rules. Let me just point that out because I am definitely in the mindset of rules are meant to be broken.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm a disruptor. I've always been a disruptor wherever I've been. So I'm like, okay, no rules. We're going to do a mission. So part of that is having family meetings. And in that, we bring our kids to participate in our house and to say, okay, like this community is yours too. So, yes, mom and dad have bought this. We've worked very hard to provide a life for you. And at the same time, we want you to contribute to this. So you get to pick the menu. You get to pick the things that you want our family to work on and to do and what can we do better and how can we be better. Amazing things have come out from this. Every year they pick a nonprofit organization to either raise money for or volunteer their time. And they get to pick it 100%. It's been like the Children's Hospital, Texas
Mm.
Children's Hospital is one of them. We adopted a couple of families in Houston. So, yes, it kind of puts extra stress on my husband and I, as you can
Yeah.
imagine, because we have to go with it.
Yeah.
We've allowed them this, well, not allowed them, but we've given them this freedom. Like now we have to follow through with it. So here we are at Costco buying, I don't know how many toys for families that we adopted. And yeah, it's really fun. It's
It's
fun
like,
for
"Oh
sure.
oh oh, damn it, I have to be the good person that I tried to convince my kids that I am, and I have to live up to it." And
I
stuff
have to live up
like
to it. Yeah. Exactly. It's hard, like, having your partnership is 2 people with careers. I mentioned to you in our call earlier that I was in corporate America for 21 years. I was working in oil and gas. Most of my time was in service to operations, and my husband is also career driven. So to do those things on top of that is kinda crazy, right? And I decided to take the leap of faith and start my own business. So that's been an adventure and exciting.
I can imagine. Let's talk about that. So your background was it only oil and gas prior to starting your own
Mhm.
thing, or was it
Yep.
anything else?
From
Okay.
primarily oil and gas, and then about 3 years ago, I got to tap into other industries as well. So I have a little bit of tech, more so, whereas I'm consulting them on inclusion and coaching, some education, different types of industries. So I got to experience how different oil and gas is compared to other industries and how
Mm,
similar they are. So it was really intriguing to see that part of it. But yeah, I like to say that I grew up in oil and gas.
yeah. I'd love to hear I've gotta imagine that that story of going from accounting in oil and gas to what you're doing now, like, that's not a career path that many people have probably taken. I'd love to hear what led up to that. Where did it kinda start? Did you know that this was something that you cared deeply about for a long time, or did it arise at some point for you? How did you get there?
Well, okay, you ready? Okay, I got your popcorn because there is a good story.
You got my coffee, that's good.
You got
So
take a pause, take a pause, go to the bathroom break, get some water, get some cafecito, and then we'll have a conversation about it. I'm taking a certification to do, it's called the Hogan assessment, a leadership assessment, kind of personality, behaviors, and all that stuff. And when I told the assessor, since I'm facilitating it, I also have to take the assessment. I told him what I did for 18 years of my career. I told him that I was an accountant, and he said, wow, your assessment tells me that you were never supposed to be an accountant and that was not the job for you. He's like, I don't understand. Like, I'm just so baffled about it. But back to kind of like the very, 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 very beginning, being first generation, both my parents didn't speak the language when they came here. They had to, and I am going to use some words that may trigger some people. So, for people who are listening to this, just kind of take note of, your reactions to some of my words for it and be happy to have a conversation if it, something comes up for you. But I use the word assimilation, and a lot of people have a negative connotation to that word, and I don't like labeling things good or bad because certain behaviors or certain things that we do, obviously there's like limits. Okay. So before anybody like
Yeah.
starts making assumptions here, but there's sometimes behaviors that have protected you throughout your work journey or personal journey or whatever it may be. And so my parents came to the US and that was their dream. Their dream was to get to the US. And as a result of that, they kind of forced us, not forced us, but they were like to really embrace American culture and to almost forget about our culture. Like, yes, we're going to honor certain parts of it, but we're not there anymore. We're here in the US. And that was really, really hard. At the time, it wasn't. But as I got older and when I got into university, that was really impacting me at that point because I thought I was like everyone else, but I wasn't like everyone else. I grew up in Northside, Houston, and in very different schools than the hodgepodge of, University of Houston, which it had people from all over the world, from different social economic statuses and different cultures. And all of a sudden, I was not like everyone else, if that makes sense. And by
Yeah.
everyone else, I mean by who was the dominant culture at the time and spaces that I was in.
And where did your
And
parents come
so
from? Sorry?
Mexico. So they
Okay.
both came from Mexico. So that was like, really tough. And so when I knew that I was going to go to college, I knew that to have a better life, as first generation, another thing that happens with first generation, especially Latina daughters, we get a lot put on our shoulders, a lot of expectation, a lot of like, there's no room for any error. There's a lot of perfectionism that happens. There's also a lot of caregiving that happens. So you mentioned, your spouse, she was a caregiver. I'm very familiar with that because, we were set to take care of all the cousins that were younger, take care of the household, clean the household. And that's just a very common thing in our family. So I knew that I wanted to go to university. I just didn't know what to do. And at the time, I was interning for the company that I stayed at for 21 years. And my boss, he brought me into his office and he's like, all right, well, where's your college application? And I said, well, here it is. And he's like, okay, great. Looks good. Here's your essay. That looks great. Okay, go submit it. And he, kind of helped me. After a year of being at university, he pulled me aside and he's like, so what degree are we doing? I don't know, something cool like, communications or international business or general business. And he's like, no, we're not doing that. Go take this accounting class and see how you did. And I said, okay. Take the accounting. I said, I made an A. He's like, take another one. I said, okay. I made an A again. He's like, okay, well, you're going to do accounting until you figure out what you really want to do. He's like, you're good at it. So do it. And then you'll figure it out. Right. So I always blame him. Uh,
I wonder what his perspective was. It sounds to me like establishing kind of a floor for what your outcome could be, right? So if nothing else, you're gonna have a reliable job, like, until
yeah.
you find something else to do, maybe?
Exactly. I think his whole well, I don't think, but I know his whole thought was, I'm going to help you build this foundation and I'm going to mentor you because I see a lot of potential in you. And this is what I know. It's not that he's trying to push his perspective down on me or change who I was in any kind of way. He's like, I see this potential in you. And until you can kind of figure it out for yourself, let's put a good foundation. Because ultimately, if you end up doing something totally different, you could always rely on this.
Mhm.
And so I always say that I blame him for things.
Yeah.
And I do something totally different now, right? I'm no longer in accounting, as you very well know. But that experience, it's not like my tools or my experiences or the things that I learned being an accountant for that long went away. They just were added tools that I added to my toolbox, and I keep
Mhm.
that experience with me forever. And every experience that you have is kind of like a, fellow stepping block to your whole pyramid that you have. And it builds who you are. And when I knew it's been a long while now that I knew that I wasn't meant to be an accountant, but I persevered anyways. It was 7 or 8 years ago when I knew I was like, "Okay, I'm not completely satisfied here." I worked a lot too, and coming from a Latin background, and I'm making an assumption here that everybody's like this, but for me, my own experience was I'm going to work harder than anybody else in this room. I'm going to keep my head down and my work is going to show, right? But I was never satisfied. It never felt like I had something tangible or something like this was mine. This is my purpose and this is my mission. And, yes, I would get the money and I would get promotions and I get raises and I was a high performer. I even started like disrupting the organization more and more to see how far I could get, with my troublemakerness. And I was like, maybe I just need to totally disrupt things and maybe that'll make me happy. And it just I was never satisfied at the end of the day. 2 or 3 years ago, I started a journey on becoming a coach. So I was coached by someone and a lot of things came out of this. A lot of like limiting beliefs that I had, meaning like I had a lot of things in my head that were holding me back. So
Mhm.
I had a lot of things that I thought were real and there were stories I was telling myself, but they weren't really real. And the impact
Mhm.
to those stories that I was telling myself was huge. It was keeping me stuck. It was keeping me saying yes to things that I probably shouldn't have said yes to, just all different things. Wow, this is really incredible. I always thought that coaching was reserved for executives, not people like me. And in oil and gas and leadership teams, I don't see a lot of people like me, right? So bright Latina, female woman with a big voice and bright colored nails.
Yeah.
And most of the time I wear hoop earrings.
You're a stereotypical accountant, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I am very much stereotypical accountant, yeah. But you know what? Like I started thinking back at my whole history to when I was in high school. So I've mentioned this story to you before. And the common thread of all my stories throughout my journey was people. I was very much driven to help people, to organize things for people, events for people, collaborate with people. bring people with teamwork. And if I looked at all my performance reviews, which I did, my coach made me do this. He said, look at all your performance reviews. What's the common thread here? And one of the biggest common threads was the team aspect of it, the people side of it, the collaboration. I was never afraid to walk into anybody's office. I didn't care who you were or what you did or what you didn't do. One, I was always going to know your name and I was always going to know a detail about you that would connect us. And then I was going to honor like who you were as a person. I even went back all the way to I went to high school for law enforcement and criminal justice. It's HISD proud baby here. And my parents being, blue collared workers, they couldn't pick me up on time a lot of the time. So school would end and we would be there, right? So, and it was a whole group of us. We were all very similar. A lot of us were first generation, many from different, parts of the world and backgrounds and whatnot. Oh, this one guy brought like he got aged me, but he brought boombox. Okay, like he brought a boombox, brought a CD player, and he put music on. I was like, oh, let's start dancing. Being Latina, yes, I love to dance. I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, yeah, let's do, salsa, merengue, bachata, like, let's get some hip hop in there. Let's just dance." And I said, "You know what? Like, I think this is something that we need here. Like, I think
Yeah.
we all need community. We all need a sense of belonging. We need a place where we can all bring our own unique selves into a place that's safe that has a sense of belonging. Because if we don't, I'm a firm believer that everybody seeks their community. So, side story, I keep going with side stories, but my brothers went to a really rough school and they were involved in groups that they probably shouldn't have been involved in, right? And I look back at it and I said, well, what they were seeking was community. They were seeking for someone to understand them, to listen to them, to not make assumptions about them. So I decided to create this group called Alma Latina, which means Latin soul. And even though it was Latin soul, it's because we were what I'm Latina, but it was really like the soul of the school where these kids that came from really hard working parents and in turn, they saw all those behaviors. And every single one of those kids that was in that group, they've now at my age, because I still follow a lot of them, they've achieved immense great things. And not because of the Alma Latina, right? But because they saw their parents like work so hard and they're
Mhm.
like, yeah, I'm gonna work just as hard or harder and get ahead. This group kind of grew and, we had this community and it helped us not go and do the bad things that kids
Yeah.
at that age do, right? So it gave us that kind of haven and support system. And I've done that all throughout my life.
You're a community
When I
builder.
Yeah, I'm a community builder and that's my kind of superpower in this world. And I said, okay, well, I'm good at that, right? Like I'm good at business. Again, my accounting side, I'm good at like figuring out what I need from a money standpoint. Okay, and I love it. So let's do it. and and
Mm.
that's why I do what I do is building communities.
So I've got a dozen notes from when you were talking. There's so much fascinating stuff. So I want to go back to what you said about, when your parents came to the country and you said that, it sounds like assimilation was really important to them. Is that fair for what you kinda said, where they really kinda focused on embracing the American way of things and almost to the point of suppressing your heritage and your original culture? And you also mentioned, right next to that, like, behaviors that you developed that protect you and work for a while, but then maybe they don't. What behaviors do you think came out of that or that proved to not be useful or that you outlasted?
So yes to the assimilation and yes to like to suppressing the culture 100%. I think what came out of my childhood and my kind of upbringing is this sense of that working as hard as you can. In that assessment, I definitely came out as a workaholic. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that reaching out to people. So reaching back, reaching forward, reaching sideways. So always making sure that everybody within your community has what they need, right? So from the workaholic standpoint, I think that helped me so much when I didn't know what I was doing. Like everything was brand new to me, and I didn't have someone as an example of this is how it should be done. Right. So I felt like university, my college application, I probably could have done better on them, or I could have finished them faster, or I could have finished college faster, or whatever it may be. But it's like I had to start from very beginning. Asking for help is
Mm,
another behavior that I still struggle with. I have awareness of it at the moment, but I have a tendency to not ask for help, right? I would rather just carry everything on my shoulder and be like, yeah, I'll carry you too, and you too. And, like just help everybody like this Amazonian woman or something. That has both helped me and hurt me, obviously, right? As you can imagine, like you have to be willing to ask for help
mm,
in every situation. You have to be willing to sit down to somebody, whether it's your boss or a colleague or a peer, and say, I'm drowning. Like, I need help at this moment. Even personally, our mental health cases are rising at the moment. And a lot of people tend to believe that they're the only ones and that they're alone. And that's where that shame and the fear tends to kind of develop and grow because it loves it, right? Like they start going in this spiral of things. So I think asking for help has definitely hurt me a lot of the times, but it's also helped me, right? Because it's
mm.
also given me kind of that push, like, no, why not me? If,
Yeah.
if they can do it, why not me? There's nothing holding me back here. Like, yeah, it might be hard for me to do what I want to do, but the only person that's in my way is going to be me and my fears and my shame. And
What's a trigger for you in a good way? What's a trigger in your mind that helps you know or recognize when you should be asking for help, but you're not? Have you
good
noticed any?
question. Yes, because I'm a coach and a facilitator. Like when we get trained and we start learning how to be a coach and a facilitator, we start having to pay attention very much to our physical reactions to
Mm,
things because our mind might be playing tricks on ourselves, but our physical reaction will never lie. And so I started really paying attention to when I was uncomfortable in a situation. And I had to start learning also to trust my intuition, which for a long time I suppressed. Kind of going back to my parents, they were saying, my natural instinct was XYZ. And they were saying, no, you need to be this. This is your box. This is who you need to be successful. So that was in my natural instinct.
yeah.
So I kind of really started distrusting myself a lot and my own intuition. So one, I had to learn how to trust myself and my own intuition. As soon as I was able to do that, then I could pay attention to my body. So when I was in a situation where it was going to trigger me, right? And then saying, oh, you're taking off too much. You could feel like your shoulders are tense, you're like angry. I learned this a while ago from someone. They're saying, when you build resentment towards something or someone, it's because a need of yours wasn't being met. And I think so many people, they don't know where these feelings are coming from. And they don't know how to put words to what they're feeling or what they're experiencing too. So when I facilitate, the first thing I do is okay, what is our shared understanding? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And what is our shared language? Because what means something to you might mean something differently to me. And so that's always like my foundation to anything that when I coach or facilitate, it's like, I ask that often. I said, well, what does this mean to you? Or, can you define this? Because your experiences are going to make that definition very differently.
That's really good. I wrote that one down selfishly because in my work in consulting and some of the leadership development stuff, I'm hyper focused on what are we trying to do here? And like, what is the point? Why are we here? Why are you here? Like all of that kind of stuff. But what is our language? Like, what do we actually mean when we say things? There's a lot of landmines that you can run across there if you don't
Hmm.
clarify those things up front. Did your parents have or develop any kind of a community in America?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So they
Yeah.
weren't
Yeah.
they weren't hyper isolated, and so your community building wasn't an opposition to them. It was kind of an embracing of how they operated.
It was an embracing of how they operated and also our culture. So one of the best, best parts of any Latino household is you can always knock on my door and there will always be food and there will always be room for you to stay. One beautiful thing of our culture, and my husband, who's British, has had to embrace that, which he really struggles with. I'll say, "Oh, we're having people over." "Okay, how many people?" I don't know." "Okay. What time are they coming?" Don't know. I just told them be here after 1." He's like, "Okay." So he's at 13 years of this, and he still is not comfortable with this at all, but he's getting there. I think by the
Yeah.
20-year mark, he might
Well, you just
he
gotta give them
might
a
get there.
range. There will be somewhere between 10 and 200 people here, between 1 and 1, probably.
There you go. That's I don't you know what, Matt, I'm gonna steal that one because I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "Well, how do you know how many people to cook?" I said, "You don't. You just buy a ton of food." So I can't cook for 3 people. I have to cook for 20 plus people. So
That's
yeah,
cool.
so that was such a big, and that's where Somos culture came about, right? Somos meaning we are in Spanish. So I use Somos a lot, like we are brave, we are community, we are joy, we are kind. Those are things that people cannot take away from you. The world is just crazy at the moment. There's a lot of things happening and it's really scary and it's so easy to sit in front of the TV and just be scared for our lives and be scared for our children and have our lives be driven by that fear. It takes a disruptor and for you to say, nope, not today. And you gotta think about the things that people can't take away from you, right? Which is that community, the joy, your bravery, and your kindness. People cannot take away that from you. They might be able to take everything else away, but they can't take those things away from you. So that's why Somos was so important for me to
Yeah.
build and to make it very if you go on my website, there's so many colors. It definitely looks like a Latin party in there.
That's interesting. I wanna get into this and help me if I'm clumsy around it. I think that, from my personal experience, straight white guy, lots of privilege in my bubble in Texas for a long time. Growing up, especially when we moved to Houston in 2011, got introduced to a lot more diversity, not just racial or otherwise, but also economic and all kinds of stuff. And I know fairly early on in what I would call, I don't know, my attempt at, like, maturing and expanding my worldview and stuff, I remember there was a discomfort. I've seen this in a lot of places. There's people that feel like in order to not be racist, you don't even acknowledge racial differences. So there's people that would be hesitant to say that a person is black or that Latina or things like that. So it's almost what brought it up is when you were talking about almost the suppression of your parents' culture and like assimilate into America, like ignore where we were, that we are American, we are this. I don't think I have a specific question in there, but I wanted to bring that topic up because I feel like that's something that is uncomfortable for a lot of people is acknowledging the differences in a respectful and supportive way. What comes to
And
mind when I bring all that up?
well, a lot really one, first, like an acknowledgement that you did use, you're like, I'm a straight white privileged man. A lot of people have fears over the word, right? Again, we go back to how do you define privilege? Because people will make an assumption of what privilege is defined as.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to tell my story about the privilege stuff. So when you were talking
Yeah.
about your parents, so I came from like both of my parents, their childhoods were, you know, not great. So abuse, suicide, poverty, drugs, crime, like brutal, brutal childhoods. They worked really, really hard to give me a better chance, right? But neither of them graduated high school. They got GEDs, and my dad did like some technical training and stuff. And so I think growing up and 10 years ago, if anybody would have called me privileged, I would have said, bullshit. My life isn't easy, or my family's life hasn't been easy. Like, I think when we hear the word privilege, a lot of people think of family money, trust fund babies, like silver spoon, all that kind of stuff. But it was a conversation with a friend of mine where we were talking, and he's a black guy, and we were talking, and I realized, so his story, he had been held, a cop had pointed a gun at him on a routine traffic stop. And I'm like, okay, that's a problem I will never have to deal with, most likely. That's, to me, when I think of, call it white privilege, it's there's problems and issues that I don't have to deal with because I'm white. It's not that my life is easy. How does that
Yeah.
definition resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because even where I sit as this Latina woman, I carry certain privileges. Even within my own culture, right? My skin color is lighter.
Mm,
So the colorism is a big thing in the Latino and Black community, many other communities as well too. There's a degree of privilege that we often carry, depends on what space you're in. And you're right. Like there are things that I will not experience and I don't have to experience. And that's my own privilege that I carry
mm,
that I don't have to experience. My children, my two sons won't have to go into a grocery store and ask for a receipt even if they buy a pack of gum. Many of my friends who have black sons have to teach their sons that that's what they have to do. And so when you hear again, when I go back and talk about the power of story, and let me just preface here, because you've brought this up actually very early on when we were talking, asking someone to share their story. And I'm not saying this for you, I'm just saying this for your listeners, essentially, especially if you've not been in a space where you have diversity, where you have close people that have different experiences than you do. If you're in a community that everybody looks like you, everybody has the same socioeconomic status as you, everybody thinks like you. It's hard to humanize someone else's experience. And that's why I love the power of story to bring in. At the same time, though, it's not up to someone who has been historically underrepresented to share that story for them, like, or to be that. Because the problem is that it might open up certain triggers for them.
mm,
Like for me as a facilitator and a coach, the first thing I had to learn how to do was understand my own biases. What were my triggers? Who triggered me? How did they trigger me? And I had to really coach myself, like, okay, where did this come from? And there's even as a facilitator, sometimes like we always facilitate in pairs of two because there might be someone in that group that triggers me. And my co-facilitator will know what that person looks like and they will take the lead. They're like, you know what, I can have this conversation with someone. So
could
all that to say is we have to be very careful and mindful and ask for permission for someone to share their story. Like, are you comfortable with sharing that story with me? I want to learn more about this. It's not your responsibility to teach me. It's my responsibility to learn and the things that make me curious. But can I ask for permission to learn your story and to hear your story? Does that make
mm,
sense?
yeah. Can you share your definition of the word trigger in that context?
Yeah, trigger means for me, it's something, it brings up like, okay, I'm gonna go back to my like physical reaction. When something triggers me, like I get like, okay, in Spanish it's called escalofrío. I don't know what it's called in English. Like it's like you get little prickles on your,
Yeah, goosebumps.
and
Yeah.
goosebumps, there you go. So see, like I grew up in America and there's certain words that I still don't know in English. But I get like little bumps and something like it kind of like pushes me back and it's like, there's something here. It kind of takes my breath away a little bit. My eyebrow furrows. A trigger to me would be something that has maybe brought up something from the past or brought up a fear or an experience or maybe shame a little bit. And I gotta figure out where that's coming from.
Mm, okay. And
How would you define that? How would you define trigger?
I think since you said it, I'm gonna build off it, so I get to cheat here. But I think it's really similar. I think it's something that elicits an emotional response that you don't fully understand, or maybe you do understand, but, it's an emotional response. Like,
Yeah.
I can think of one that is the most, like, innocent thing. I met a person at a client that looked like a person, at a different client that was a real asshole. And, like, I noticed it not the first time we met, but, like, a couple times in, and I'm like, inherently, I noticed that I am judging this person more harshly. I don't like them by default just because I'm relating them back to this other person that I'm calling an asshole, but I'll add some empathy for him later. Just but that's how I kinda think about it. It brings up something that you haven't resolved in your own mind, and it could be a
Yeah.
trauma, or it could be a fear, or it could be all kinds of different stuff, but I know that, like, trigger is a that word is a trigger for a lot of people. It carries a lot of baggage, and there's memes about people being oversensitive and stuff like that. So I think it's interesting to figure out what we're actually talking about there.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I'm gonna steal that, definition, by the way, for myself, so I don't have to use escalofrío. You know the thing, right? Okay.
Yeah. No,
Um,
you got there. I
but
just reworded yours.
the most the one of the things that you bring about is, like, the sensitivity part of it. That's always a very interesting topic to me when people bring that up. "Oh, I'm gonna use this word, which I don't like it, but, they're like, 'We're raising snowflakes.'" Is the word that I often hear that. And what I would like to challenge people in that sense is like, actually, I'm raising a man, a boy, who is going to be in tune with their emotions, who doesn't adhere to the societal feminine or masculine, and we've never done that. Pink was never for girls, blue was never for boys. Mommy is super strong. She could do anything that a man can do to a certain degree. And actually, I don't wanna do everything that a man do. Like, my comparison to that whole actually phrase really bothers me because it's saying that the default is men at that point. When you say things like that, like, "I can do anything a man can do," you're saying that the default is bad. Actually, I can do anything that mommy wants to do and chooses to do, right? And I have no limitations at that point. So I really challenge people who use word like, oh, this new generation, they're overly sensitive, they're being snowflake. And I'm like, no, I'm really raising kids that are emotionally intelligent in spaces. And it makes me think about something you wanted to really kind of bring up, if I can kind of bring up here is when you have people who do have resistance on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, of belonging in the workplace, of, justice in the workplace. And I hear a lot of times, right? You hear a lot of times like, oh, what's the new trendy word? Or this is the new trend that's happening. No, this has actually been happening for many, 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 many years. As a facilitator and as a coach, and people who, one advice that I would give to people who are trying to get into this work is really understanding and knowing when the person across for you may not be ready to have this conversation. Because at the end of the day, it's like, what's the intent or what's the impact that you want to have this conversation? And sometimes the answer is, yeah, I can't help you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's people that I run into that aren't ready to have even conversations about, like, treating employees fairly, just all of them, right? And so if you had that layer of complexity and difficulty and discomfort of DEI, like, I can imagine that increases the number of people that aren't ready to really engage with that by quite a bit.
Yeah, it's about challenging assumptions
Yeah.
and going from a place where they're making assumptions of an uninformed place into an informed place. That's really that shift that we really try to do as facilitators.
And I think that's a huge point because I know in 2020 there was a lot of rhetoric around like BLM. It's a new thing, right? Where's all this new stuff coming from? And it wasn't that, it was bringing to light things that are happening. The George Floyd stuff, how many of those happened without a camera? And I think that reframing it, and I hope that more people realize that when we hear about something new, so like something that I wasn't really aware or cognizant of at all was ableism until, the last couple of years probably. And that's something that is, it sounds new. It sounds like, oh, it's another thing. But, 70 years ago, being black was also like, oh, this new thing that we've got to deal with now, we being white people, and, women's suffrage movement and all of that stuff. Like all of those things were a new thing at some point to people. And that was an interesting connection that helped me kind of realize how narrow my perspective is, right? You just really don't see the whole world from your own eyes, and the value of other people's perspective is crazy.
Absolutely. And I think the position that you're in, Matt, because you acknowledge your kind of privilege and your place in life. And one of the things, I think one of the questions that you asked me early on was, what makes you want to be on the podcast? And I turned it back around to you and I said, well, why would you want to have me on the podcast? And you talked about like utilizing your platform and utilizing your network. And at that point, I realized, okay, yes, you're a cis white man with privilege, yet you use your power for good, right? You're going to reach back for people and that's really what it is. It's like understanding that sitting here as a Latina woman, that there's certain privileges and powers I have and that I can easily reach back because once I've arrived or I've gotten here, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to reach back and help my people and help not my people, but help people in general who need that hand of help. And I think that's really what it is. In any space that you have, think about who has the power? Who carries the power? And we always talk about like it's white men, but different communities, that power may be someone else. That may look different. So you have to identify who has the power and how are they using the power and how willing are they to learn other people's perspectives and reach back and be that mentor or ally or sponsor or coach for people. Because I wouldn't be where I am at today if I didn't have those people in power to reach back for me, to see that
Mhm.
potential in me and saying, you know what, we have differences. And we connected through similarity. You have your family history of how the way you grew up. You and I connected very much into that in the sense of like, well, I grew up in a very rough neighborhood. I can understand, how difficult it was for you to grow up. Okay, we have a connection there. And then we think about what are things that make us different and then honoring those differences or celebrating those differences
Mm.
and say, oh, I can go to Liz's house and, at 1 a.m. and there'll be some
Yeah.
food there.
That's cool. As long as I gotta bring a six pack with me though, at least, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's cool. I just want there to be more useful conversations on the topic. It seems like there's a lot of people just kinda yelling from both sides. Like, everything in America, especially, is kinda how publicly at least it's perceived. But in the interactions that I've had with people, I've yet to run into a single person in all of my work that was intentionally discriminatory or doing it on purpose. I've heard of one, from a friend, but there's a lot of well-intentioned people that want to learn and need tangible ways to approach things and to support and help and things like that. Maybe that's a good pointed question is if there are people listening that are having trouble being comfortable or getting comfortable with approaching the conversation, an issue at work or within their leadership team, any of that stuff around the DEI space, whether it's an individual thing or a systemic thing or whatever. What would you tell somebody that wants to be an ally and support and help?
So what I would tell people, it just depends on where like when I talk to organizations, I do start off with, okay, we're not going to solve world problems. Okay. We're not here to solve racism around the world and prejudice around the world. We're here to solve within our own community, right? Within our own organization and grow. It is the responsibility. And I put this a lot on the individuals. So it's your own individual responsibility to grow in that space. And there's so many resources available. I have a whole network. I can lift you off 20 people that would be willing to share their story that are in this profession. And I will give you different perspectives as well too. And just reading like TED Talk, YouTube videos. as I was working through my own biases, was made aware of my own biases, I was like, okay, then I was like, let me go and seek stories out for this. And that's why I love TED Talk. I love YouTube, shoot, TikTok and Instagram reels. Like I purposely sought out communities that were different than me. And it was uncomfortable. Okay. Like there was some things that came out in there, like, oh my God, like how can I be thinking this way? Like I've made so many mistakes. I sound stupid. My biggest fear was hurting someone. And you would think it was such a real fear that it crippled me. And I was like, okay, all right. Again, never going back to the good versus bad behaviors, right? I asked myself, how is this behavior helping me get to my desired outcome?
Mhm.
Right? So my desired outcome is to be more inclusive, to be equitable. And I want to eventually help to build these inclusive communities. I
Mhm.
want to be a coach and a facilitator. So is this fear helping me? No, it was not helping me. So I have to learn how to be comfortable with that uncomfortableness and
Yeah.
make mistakes and say, I am sorry that I hurt you. And also, too, a lot of the times we don't say thank you enough. So, Matt, thank you for like sharing your story and sharing kind of your perspective and being very willing to listen to me as well too. And I just think that I'm sorry and thank you are just two things that are underused so
Mhm.
much in business. And that will
Yep.
get you so far. In my emails, when somebody's telling me that I'm being stupid in my email, I'm like, "You know what? Thank you for thank you for catching my mistake. I
Yeah.
appreciate you."
Yeah. I think "I'm sorry," especially. You hear "thank you" a lot, almost to the point that it's meaningless in a lot of cases. Like, if you have "thank you" as your default, like, email signature, that's not a thank you. Um, but "I'm sorry," I don't hear that except for in a, like, passive aggressive way, where it's like, "I'm sorry if I didn't say this clearly for you." That's the vibe of "I'm sorry" that I hear, but actually
Mm.
saying, "Hey, I screwed up, I'm sorry," and that should be okay.
And also too, like one other thing that came up for me right now as you were saying that is also thinking about things inwardly. So we tend to, as we make assumptions based on our biases, we tend to they and others. Like, let's get away from like the heavy topic of being anti-racist and everything. So let's just even go into an organization, right? Where you have individual like contributors, you have middle management, you have leaders, you have upper management. What happens in those big organizations? You have everybody talking, going, well, they don't want to give us raises and they don't understand us and they don't have our perspective and it's always others because it's easier to kind of dehumanize that person and put them in a category and say, well, they don't understand us.
Mhm.
Whereas if you bring it to you and say, I don't feel understood, that changes the conversation so much. I do this to my husband as well too when we fight. Which may sound a little passive aggressive, but I do this. I say, you know what? Instead of saying, well, you did this and you did that and you haven't done this and you're not picking up the trash and I hate the way you load the dishwasher. Da, da, da," I will say, hey, husband, I don't really feel appreciated right now. I don't feel heard or understood. Like, can we talk about it? Like, and I will always say, like, I get it. I know you're really under a lot of pressure and you got a lot of things happening, but this is how I feel right now. Immediately his guard goes down, right?
Mhm.
Like I can tell, like his shoulders go
Yeah.
down. He's like, and he'll say, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. Cause it's your kind of
Yeah.
reaction to it, right? And then we can have an open dialogue about it.
Yeah, and then at the end, you hit him with the right hook about the dishwasher, right? Mm.
I hit him with the chancla. Have you heard about the chancla, the
Oh,
flip
yeah.
flops? I'm like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
take the chancla out. I'm like, shoot.
Yeah, my grandma was Cuban, and so not by blood, but yeah, she, there's some thwacks in the background there. Um, this is so interesting, and I love that you brought up, like, the fear of hurting people. I think it's a well-intentioned thing that also holds back progression. I think and people are afraid of misstepping, doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, and all of that stuff, and to the point where it stops them from doing anything. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think what I would offer to people, the question that I would be if somebody told me like they were wanting to coach in DEI upskilling and they said, yeah, I'm really afraid of hurting somewhere. I'd really get out away from the surface level, which oftentimes DEI, you talk about the checkbox. It really isn't a checkbox. It is very surface level. The intention is good, right?
Mm,
Your programs are good. Your intention is good. People really care about it, but it's digging deeper instead of going wide, going deep
mm.
into where this is coming from. And so I would challenge that person, not challenge them. I could just don't challenge people. I would offer to say, where does that come from? And what would you like to see differently?
Yeah,
And if you didn't have this fear, what would happen if you didn't have this fear? Because again, it's like these stories that we tell each other. And the reason why we're so polarized at the moment is because of fear. We're
yeah.
all afraid of losing something, our livelihood, what we're used to, what we're accustomed to for our children. That's really where the polarization comes from. And so when we can really figure out where this fear is coming from, is this fear real or is this fear a story that I've created in my head? And what do I need to do to get to a safe place? And I see you kind of thinking about something that's brewing
Yeah.
in your head. And also, too, as a leader, what am I doing to create a safe place for people, for everyone?
This has been awesome. I wanna talk to you for, like, 37 more hours about all of this stuff. Thank you so much for sharing, your story, your knowledge, and putting up with my stumbling through some of these topics that I'm still sorting out my discomfort with and all this stuff. This is I don't know, I loved this. This was awesome.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me and allowing me to share my story. And because you're in it, you're in this work so often that you're doing it for other people. And it's like, it reminded me again, like, this is why I'm doing it. Like I really do have a mission and a purpose. And I will say, and maybe we can have another discussion about this, is like the new generation. That the Gen X, like I'm so excited about them. I know a lot of people are like, oh, these young people. I'm
Mm,
very excited about them because there's so much hope, and
mm.
that's really what we need.
They'll save us, I think. Well, again, this was amazing, Liz. Thank you. If people wanna reach out, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you?
And I will send you my all my contact information, but people can contact me at somosculture.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Elizabeth Davila-Sleigh. I'm on Instagram at Somos Culture LLC. And then you can email me if you want to, Elizabeth at somosculture.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.